and I'm Margot, and we are here today to talk about listening to the baby's heartbeat while they are still in utility. And this is a topic that people are super interested in, and some people don't even know that it's something they can do themselves. And we are here today to talk about why, when, how, sort of all the details that you might need to know if that's something you're interested in doing. So Marin and I are just kind of going to go back and forth talking about, again, sort of listening to baby's heartbeat in early pregnancy and then in later pregnancy. Then we're going to show you how to do that with a fetoscope on Marin's full-term belly. And then we're going to be talking a little bit more about interpretation of what you do end up hearing. And I think that's going to be our video. Cool. So to start off, let's talk about when we can listen to baby's heartbeat. So in early pregnancy, really the only way to listen to baby's heartbeat, or even really early on, see baby's heartbeat, is with ultrasound technology. So really early on, that's getting an ultrasound scan. A little later on, maybe starting around like 10-ish weeks, you can start possibly hearing baby's heart rate with a Doppler, which we'll show you later on what that looks like. And we will probably talk a little bit more about sort of some of the concerns and risks around using that technology. But then, as you get more pregnant, you can start trying to listen for baby's heart rate with a fetoscope. And again, we're going to show you how to go about doing that. But I know I've heard a little snippet of baby's heartbeat as early as 14 weeks with a good fetoscope. And you should definitely be able to find baby's heartbeat sort of once you're feeling good movement is generally around the time when people think that would be. So 18 weeks, 20 weeks, somewhere in there, depending on how good of a fetoscope you have and how skilled and practiced you are with it. Anything else to say about the when of early pregnancy?
Just that it obviously varies from person to person.
Right.
So, it could be as early as 14 weeks, again, with a fetoscope. And then for some women, it won't be until 20 weeks or 22 weeks. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's dependent on lots of things, baby's position and body type and skill and that kind of thing.
Yep.
So
that's the timeline for early pregnancy.
A stethoscope can be used as well. So a fetoscope is really just a glorified stethoscope that's made to listen to the fetal heartbeat. But many women have, just fine luck with a regular old stethoscope, especially when they kind of tune their ears into learning with that. So you could use a stethoscope for sure at about the same time, probably on average 16, 17, 18 weeks, and then continue to listen with that all the way to the end. The last way that you could hear, well, we're still talking about early pregnancy, or are we moving on? We're moving on. So by the time a baby is considered full term, and possibly before that, you can hear with just your naked ear. So of course you can't hear in your own belly. That would be ridiculous. But partners, kids, can literally put their ear to your belly where you expect the heartbeat, and in a very quiet room. You don't need anything. You don't need any kind of equipment or tools or technology. So that's really exciting, I think.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk a little bit about why we would be wanting to listen to baby's heartbeat. Again, in early pregnancy, since that's sort of the focus that we're using to sort of communicate this to you. So in early pregnancy, finding the baby's heartbeat either through ultrasound early on, Doppler, or a little bit later with a fetoscope is to confirm, most of the time, is to confirm viability. So that's something people are really interested in, especially in early pregnancy, just making sure there is a heartbeat. So that's one of the major focuses. And really, in early pregnancy, that's sort of the only why that there is.
Right. The rate of the heartbeat will change, of course, from really early pregnancy to later. So it can be used as a clue as well as far as dating.
That's true.
I mean, very loose dating, but a very early baby will have a pretty fast heartbeat, so sometimes that helps. But yeah, I'd agree. I think it's just mostly, is there a heartbeat? And especially if, the woman has had some reason to suspect there might not be, or
Right.
previous loss, it can be really, really great and encouraging to hear that
Right.
early on.
Definitely.
Yeah. Later on in pregnancy, whether it's, I guess it changes throughout pregnancy, but when you're starting to listen mid-pregnancy with a fetoscope, viability at that point, is assumed if the baby's moving and kicking. So I always think it's a really interesting question, actually. Why do we listen to the baby's heartbeat at all? Why is that part of a normal prenatal appointment when obviously the baby has one? I think there's a couple of reasons. I think especially if you're listening on your own, you're in charge of your own prenatal care, then it can just be a way of connecting with the baby. And that means you don't have to be an expert on interpretation or even counting it, really. It can just be something you hear that connects you to the baby and something that your family members can participate in because it's a cool sound. But that said, it's not for everybody. I don't think, especially if we're doing our own prenatal care, we're really taking responsibility that we need to hear a heartbeat at any point. If we don't want to, or it doesn't interest us, assuming the baby's moving and kicking, is kind of a curious subject, actually. I think a lot of the time it's definitely for, the other person, whether it's the caregiver or the, doctor or whatever, for them to confirm still viability. Once in a while people talk about a range of normal for that baby, and that's true. There is a range of normal for fetal heart tones. But again, I think that's more getting to know the baby. That's my interpretation of it. Just when you hear that heartbeat, especially through a fetoscope, it has personality in a sense. And, many midwives, that's simply their reasoning is getting to know that baby and sort of feel what it's up to.
Yeah, and what their normal is.
Yeah. Yeah. So should we show our show and tell here?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, early on, I don't have an ultrasound machine here to show you. So before about 10 weeks, really an ultrasound machine would be the only, or like a real ultrasound setup would be the only way to get baby's heart rate and beat. And, even really, really early on, you still can't hear it because that would require Doppler technology. It would just be seeing it on the ultrasound. So then, depending who you ask, some people swear that they can get a baby's heartbeat really early with a Doppler, but I'd say definitely by 10, 12 weeks, your chances of hearing it go up. Like I said, Doppler is ultrasound technology, and there's a lot of information out there about what the risks are, both known and possibly unknown. So that's definitely something to consider before using something like a Doppler, or going and getting an ultrasound or doing routine ultrasound, but that's maybe a topic for another day. And there are tons of videos on YouTube and other places that show you how to use a Doppler trying to find an early fetal heart rate. So we're not going to do that today, but it is an option, and we believe in letting people know what their options are, so that's one of them. And if you have a really cool Doppler, it has Hello Kitty tape on the back holding the batteries in. Just thought I would point that out in case you were wondering what this was. Anything else to say about that?
No, I agree. I don't think we're advocating the use because of the potential risks, for sure. But it's simply factual that if you're wanting to hear a fetal heart rate before you can hear with a fetoscope, that's the technology. That's all.
Right, and this doesn't pick up the literal baby's heartbeat. it's picking up essentially, how would you explain that? It's just like the sound.
It's sort of an echo of, and
right.
So I guess that may be helpful to some people. Deciding to use this at your own risk in early pregnancy is everybody's business. But once it's possible to hear with a fetoscope, I just really urge everybody to try and obtain that skill. You can listen all day if you want to with no harm to your baby. So, and again, like Margot's saying, this isn't really the heartbeat, it's sort of an echo of, and when you're trying to determine position, or again for that connection, you really want to hear the actual heartbeat. This is not your tool. A fetoscope or some of the other things we have would be best for that.
Yep. And if you've seen our palpation video, we talked about how starting to feel really early can help sort of develop those skills faster. And I think the same goes with the fetoscope. So, for example, I'm 14 weeks now, and I've started thinking just in the last couple days about how I'm going to start trying to hear my baby's heart rate and beat with one of these long tubed fetoscopes. And I probably won't hear anything for a while, and that's fine. I might. That would be really exciting and fun. But that's not kind of the point. The point is just getting used to doing it, practicing on myself, since I've only experienced listening to other people's babies with a fetoscope, and just trying and feeling like I'm gaining sort of that experience. Eventually we'll be able to hear it easily and often and whenever I want. So I would just encourage people, if they do want to use a fetoscope, don't wait till, you are sure you think you're going to hear one, because you might not hear one then because you haven't been practicing. So.
Well, and it's very subtle. We can't communicate the way it feels or sounds through video, but it's very subtle. And I remember putting a fetoscope on for the first time, probably close to 10 years ago, when I was 40 weeks. I had never listened with a fetoscope, and I couldn't hear anything simply because I didn't know what I was listening for, and it doesn't reach out and grab you the way a Doppler would, or the kind of sound we're used to. It can be really subtle even for a full-term baby. So that's great advice. Just kind of poke around and listen to all the different sounds that your body makes and your placenta makes, and you'll hear it.
So just, I guess, because we have some other things we're going to show and tell, just to let you know what this is. This is an Allen Style economy fetoscope. I believe we got on Amazon for probably about $18, maybe even less. So this is really a cheap tool. It works great. It might be a little harder to hear earlier on with the long tubing, but if you're listening to your own belly, that's your only real option as far as the long tubing goes, unless you're going to get some other sort of style of fetoscope, which we don't have to show you. But I think this is a great option for most people. It's a small investment. You can pass it on to your friends when you're done with it.
Kids love it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And it's super durable, and So again, we're going to show you how to use it later on, but that's what this is.
Right. This is a similar tool. I mean, it's exactly the same. The only thing different is the length of tubing. So obviously this isn't good for self-use. Can't reach your own belly with this. But because the tubing is shorter, I think the sound is a lot clearer and better. So if somebody wants me to listen on them, I would always choose this one. So you could have it around as well for, family members or anybody that wants to experience the difference with that. This handy little tool is handmade. Got it a couple of years ago. And honestly, I don't use it too much. I think it was made by Amish out of some very beautiful wood. And the concept is the same, just that, the one side goes on the belly, the other side on the ear, and it's just magnifying anything you would hear in the uterus. So some people really like this one. You obviously can't listen to yourself. That's a huge drawback. but kind of a cool tool to have around and, I don't know, listen to your friends' babies.
Sure.
But people like it because you can feel the sound. And I know when I've used it, that seems to be true. It's just a different quality of sound. So these are only a couple examples, really. There's all kinds of other tools. But as Margot pointed out, really the long tubing stethoscope is the most economical and easiest for self-listening.
And we don't have an example of just a regular stethoscope, but that just looks like a regular stethoscope. It's very exciting.
Right.
Yep. Cool.
All right, well, we're going to move on now to the hows and a little bit about interpretation. Hi, we're back at Indie Birth headquarters here, talking about finding your baby's heartbeat. And Margot is going to give us a little demonstration on how you might go about finding the heartbeat when you're early in pregnancy.
All right, so we already talked about how this long stethoscope is really the ideal tool, and I believe Mary and I will both be using this in our demonstrations. So like I said, I'm 14 weeks, so it's a little early, but it's really never too early to start trying and practicing and listening around on your belly. So let's see. So just to start with the basics, of course, these parts go in your ears, and really the most comfortable way is they're sort of angled. If you point the angly bits towards your nose, that's what we decided, right?
All right.
So once you put these in, then you're hearing the amplified sound from this end. So this is the spot that you're going to put on your belly, and this really is designed for a forehead, like so. So you're sort of like a unicorn, but since you're listening to your own belly, you're going to be using just sort of the flat of your hand. So the only other thing to really keep in mind when you're listening is that anything that's touching, you know, here on the fetoscope, this middle part, really anywhere on here, and the tubing is gonna make sounds or interfere with the sounds which you're trying to get from here. So a lot of people sort of hold it like this, and you might still be able to hear it, especially later on. But really, if you're trying to do it and you're listening for the really, really, really faint sounds that you're going to be hearing early on in pregnancy, it's best to just kind of only touch here. Anything else before I...
So how about what do you do before you lay down?
Right. So you probably want to go pee, empty your bladder before you start, just before you're poking all over in there.
Quiet. We need quiet.
Yeah, a quiet room. Even like a fan going is going to interfere with the really, again, slight sound that you're listening for earlier on.
I think that's the worst kind of noise, actually, is
Yeah,
like
the white noise.
drone. Yeah, it's harder than just people talking to be able to hear.
So find a really quiet place. We talked a little bit in the palpation video about how a firm surface is really good. And again, all of this is just sort of more important the earlier you are, because there's less, less sound to even really hear. It's just so much quieter. So you want to give yourself the best chance to do what you're trying to do. Anything else? I would say that, especially again early on, if you've already been kind of laying around, your baby might be sort of hanging out down lower in your body, deeper in your body. So if you want to get up and go for a walk first, or do some cat-cow poses, that can sort of help float your baby up this way to be listened to. And again, this early, when they're this little and they can kind of swim away from you, it's just that much trickier, but that much more rewarding when you do find it.
Yes.
So again, when we're really early and we're listening, so sort of like when we're feeling early in pregnancy, you're feeling really, 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 really low. And the same sort of goes for when we're trying to listen. So when I am going to start listening here in a moment, I'm going to put the fetoscope, this side of the fetoscope, really low on my belly. And usually the best place to listen for baby is sort of central, in the middle of your body, if that makes sense. Just because your uterus really isn't that wide at this point anyways, so there's not that many other places for baby to be. But of course, listen wherever you think, listen all around, can't hurt anything. So I'll show you what that looks like.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about other sounds we might hear, especially early on, while I do that.
Sure. So like Margot said, the uterus at this point isn't that big. You kind of have a contained area, which should make it easier in theory, although the baby is small at this point, so it's not always as easy as it sounds. But just for fun, you could listen outside of your uterus even. You can feel the mass of your uterus. That's where you're going to try to listen for the baby. But outside of that, you'll just hear bowel sounds and other, interesting sounds that your body makes. So doing that can just help you identify what's what, especially for later. It can just be interesting too. Kids get a big kick out of, hearing belly growls and that kind of thing through a fetoscope. Other than that, as you advance in pregnancy, it should be easier to hear some other sounds. And the other sounds would be the sound of a placenta, which is kind of like a blowing sound to the mom's pulse. And then later, you can even hear cord from the baby, and that would be the baby's pulse, but is a different sound than the heartbeat. So that's sort of advanced information, I think. But the point is, there's all kinds of things to hear. And you may not be able to identify them, but you'll certainly hear them. Any luck?
No luck. Maybe next time.
Maybe baby is camera shy anyway.
Yeah. Anything else we're forgetting?
So if you were to find it, what kind of sound would you be looking for or listening for if
Right.
you've never heard it before?
So like I said, and we said earlier, that the earlier you are, the more slight the sound is. So it can almost be like this faint little tapping. And I think the best way, especially when you're new to listening and haven't heard the sound before, the best way to sort of feel confident that that is what you're hearing is probably to count. So sort of the normal range that we're looking for with a baby's heartbeat is 120 to 160 beats per minute. It can maybe be a little faster than that early in pregnancy if you were listening with the Doppler or something, but by the time you can hear the Doppler, that's usually sort of considered the healthy normal range.
Fetoscope, you mean?
What did I say?
Doppler.
Oh dear, my brain. So yeah, by the time you can hear the fetoscope, that's sort of the range that you would be looking for. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but sort of early on, in case the baby sort of swims away, you might want to listen for a shorter chunk of time. So say you listen for 10 full seconds, then you can multiply that by 6, and then you have your beats per minute. If you're really bored, like me, recently I looked to see if there was a beats per minute thing where you could like tap it on your computer, and you can. There is one. I can't remember what the like actual name of the website was, but it was like beats per minute tapper. So if you were listening and you could only catch it for a second, you could go like tap 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 on your keyboard or whatever, and it would tell you how many beats per minute that was. And so if you find something that is in that range, the 120 to 160 range, really clearly, that is your baby's heartbeat. If you found something slower, like in the 70 to 90 range, that would be probably your pulse. And the way that you would sort of distinguish between them if you were confused for some reason or just wanted to confirm would be that while you were listening, or someone else, maybe your partner, is listening to the baby, you can feel your pulse at the same time. And if they're different, then they're two separate hearts beating.
Cool.
What a miracle. Anything else about counting and what it would sound like?
Just again, highlighting the practice, I think.
Yeah.
Because our sounds, our own heartbeat, whether we hear that same pulse in our uterine arteries is really present. That's what most people hear when they put on, something to listen. Even a Doppler.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so obvious. So again, it's just sort of underneath all those sounds. That's the best way I can describe it. Sometimes it's something you just feel. It's almost like you can't hear it, you're feeling it, and it's piled under sound. So it's a glorious sound to find. You feel very proud of yourself when you do find it.
Yep. And then Mary's going to talk more about what the heart rate sounds like later. But earlier, it's got less variability also. So the baby's, nervous system and brain, all of it isn't responding to movement yet. It's sort of like a clock. So if you did find your baby's heart rate, it's almost like a little gentle ticking sound. Whereas later on, we'll tell you more about what that sounds like, or can sound like.
Yeah, having been a musician in my former life, I always say it sounds like a metronome.
Yeah.
If you know what a metronome is, just totally even, no real variation at this point in pregnancy, just a perfect tick-tock.
And that's up till about 20 weeks, 24 weeks, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
All right. All right, so last but certainly not least, Marin is going to be showing you how she uses a fetoscope to listen to her baby's heartbeat and telling you a little bit about what she's hearing and what she could be hearing and all that kind of fun, juicy stuff.
Okay, well, I'm not going to lay down quite yet, just because I have some things to cover first. But the first thing, I guess, for me to cover, for me, this pregnancy, is I'm not listening a whole lot. And I have in previous pregnancies, just because it was fun, again, connection to baby. Maybe I've been more confused in other pregnancies about position, and certainly finding a heartbeat at this gestation is pretty indicative of position. I think we'd agree on that. But this time, I'm not really listening that much. So this is one of the only times I'm actually doing this. And my reasoning this time is just simple, I think. My baby's fine and moving and well, and I don't know, maybe I just don't need to hear it as much as I used to. And like we said before, just thinking for me more about why would I listen? What does it mean? And so I think, for those of you out there that don't want to listen again, or don't see the meaning, or don't see the purpose, then that's perfectly acceptable, according to me anyway. So if you watch the palpation video, you know that I know what position my baby is in, just because this baby is very predictable, likes kind of a textbook position of having its back along my belly on the left side, which again is pretty textbook. But at this point in pregnancy, probably a couple days from labor, most babies are going to be having their back towards one side of the uterus or not. So that makes it pretty simple when you've got a pretty big baby in there, assuming they're head down, which this one is, to just listen even straight across under the belly button, between the belly button and the pubic bone. You could just basically pick a spot and pretty much hear a heartbeat. Now, if you have really good skills, you've been listening through this whole pregnancy or possibly other pregnancies or maybe other people's babies, then not only can you identify a really obvious, strong baby heartbeat at this point, but you can also hear cord. So I know my baby's over here, and the sound of the heart at this point in pregnancy is different than early. So Margot talked about it being slight in early pregnancy, pretty metronomic, and now it's more like the heartbeat you're going to hear on a baby outside the uterus, or even a young infant. You can actually hear the valves opening and closing, which is something you can't hear early on. And again, you're going to hear that difference if you have the skill to, that the cord sounds different. It will be the same rate as the baby's heartbeat, but it's a different sort of swishy sound, and that's not the opening and closing sound of the heart valves. Anything else with the way it sounds? I guess the rate is important. If you are going to count, and even if you're not going to count, you don't need a watch to use your ears and hear the fluctuation in a baby's heartbeat. So again, early pregnancy, pretty tick-tock, not a lot of variation for the reasons Margot mentioned. And a baby at this gestation, you know, a normal healthy baby, is responding to its environment. So sleeps, has active time, has, you know, times where it's kicking and moving. So when the baby is active, the heart rate will generally be higher. And when the baby's sleeping, it will generally be lower. So if you've got a baby kind of in a active state, you'll hear those fluctuations. Lots of movement and kicking, you'll hear it go up and then come back down. So we call that variability, and it's a good sign that the baby is reacting to the environment in which he or she lives in there. And that's always a good thing. But again, it's not something you're going to hear early. It's not something you're going to hear till at least 28 weeks. And even then, you know, you would have to probably listen for a little bit of time and maybe even graph it on paper to be able to see that. But you can literally just hear it at the end. Anybody could. That it's just like an adult. If we ran around the block, ooh, you know, our heart rate would speed up. And if we were just waking up from a nap, it would be slower. So, you know, those are all the things that go into listening to a full-term baby. So I can certainly demonstrate. And again, same rules apply. Empty bladder probably feels best. Flat surface, not so important at this point. But a general knowledge or understanding of where your baby's back is at, specifically over the left shoulder blade, would be helpful because that's where you're going to hear it the loudest. You got it, Ian?
And at this point, if you have a big belly, you don't want to be laying down for a super duper long time.
That's the truth.
Your mic.
But you, of course, can feel.
Right, so nice contraction here. Anybody want to see a contraction? So it's hard to listen through a contraction sometimes. It's also hard to feel your own belly even, just because everything feels firm. It's hard to determine position. So you can wait till it goes away, which will happen in a minute or so. Or I can just go for it because I know precisely where my baby is, which is here, and the back is over on this side. So presumably if I put it right there, I will hear a strong heartbeat. And again, if I were to listen, keep listening, and probably still hear sort of echoes or a chord, but it wouldn't be quite the same sound. Yep, there it is. Loudest about right here. And I can continue to hear it. The other sound that I hear is my placenta is probably about there. So that's my pulse. And I hear kind of a whooshing sound sort of above the baby's heartbeat. Anything to add?
Is there anything you can sort of determine or guess based on where you're hearing your baby's heartbeat?
What do you mean?
Like, would it be different if you were hearing it up here versus hearing it down here? Or,
I think just some subtleties of position if you're really into exactly how your baby's lying. I mean, at any given moment, the back might be more forward facing, or, you know, it might be over here. A baby that's posterior and has its back towards your back, usually you'll hear those heart tones best in the center of your belly, possibly to either side. And those won't be as clear and strong just because you're not over the shoulder, you're over the chest, and it's through, a bunch of layers. So again, it can be really helpful in determining position, but then that would be something that you care about for some reason, and there's not necessarily a reason to care. A fetoscope does allow you, though, to again focus in on the real heartbeat. So I think it comes up a lot, with people that we know, is the baby head up or head down? We talked about that on the palpation video. Well, heart tones and location can assist in figuring that out. It's not the be all and end all, but if a baby were truly breech, then you'd expect, in sort of a normal breech circumstance, that those heart tones would be a lot higher. And again, it's learning the sound of the actual heartbeat, because you can hear things all over. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, anything to close it up with?
I don't think so.
All right.
If you have any more questions that we didn't cover in the video, be sure to let us know and we will answer them as best as we can.
Yeah. Happy listening.
Yeah.